generative AI to have a classifier on device for individuals. So as they launch a product on the marketplace that allows you to do really basic things, track your stress levels throughout the day, which is a powerful insight that people can gain about their own brain health and wellness. It will learn the individual and co-evolve over time so that each device will have a personal classifier for an individual that generative AI enables, that can learn brain signals over time and be able to, essentially say, when you are thinking this, or you want to type this, or you're experiencing this, this is what the brain activity looks like. That co-evolution is happening so much more quickly that it allows companies to ship products with very basic functionality that then also allows this co-evolution. The good thing is those classifiers don't seem to apply across people. So some of these studies have shown that when a classifier is trained for a particular person and then you try to apply it to somebody else's brain signals, it doesn't translate across. And so if we put into place now measures that really secure the privacy of the classifier, as well as the data that's being aggregated, this could be potentially transformative technology for brain health and wellness and more seamless interaction with other technology, but only if we put into place the design measures, as well as really updating our interpretation of existing human rights around freedom of thought and privacy and self-determination to align with the rights of individuals around that data.
Okay, thank you. Omdeep, I'd like to come back to you after hearing both from Gary and Nita there. You're in discussion with a lot of policymakers, government leaders, and Gary was highlighting, for example, the security concerns on top of the technology that could actually interfere there. Do you feel there's a sufficient understanding among policymakers and government leaders, both on the capabilities of the technology currently, how quickly it's moving, and what advice would you have on, improving understanding of these capabilities?
The short answer is no. So we need to raise awareness of the capabilities. And I think we need more diversity in terms of the messaging around these technologies, because often policymakers just get one kind of messaging, which is that this is going to solve some health problems that are, that you relate to in a very emotional way. So we need a more nuanced conversation around that. And that's what we've been trying to promote through the ethics lens, the human rights lens, and also the AI governance lens. I think this point about the convergence that both Nita and Gary have made is very important, because you are able to read brain signals today, process them. Signal processing has been with us for a while. Now you're able to process signals in a significantly different way. You have these papers coming out of Stanford from Japanese researchers. I worry at this stage about, silly use, stupid use, and that would then create problems for the field as a whole, which is at a very early stage of evolution. Good science, the good applications would get constrained. So we need to create a more reasoned debate around this. And the participation of the private sector is crucial. This is one thing, frankly, we are struggling with at the United Nations. How to bring the startups, the companies that are actually developing these technologies into this conversation.
Okay, thank you. Gary, any additional thoughts?
I'll give a metaphor that I think should be out there, which is these tools are going to become Trojan horses, right? I think this is at the heart of what Nita is really saying, is we're going to see things like the Apple Vision Pro, maybe not, I'm not sure Apple would do this, but we'll see other vendors do this, and Apple's strong on privacy, but others will be less strong on privacy, and they will use this to train classifiers and so forth. I might be slightly, my predictions on how fast people can make something like that might be slightly slower than it is, but the general point is absolutely true. They're going to be Trojan horses. You should think about Facebook, right? You thought you were talking to your friends, and really what they've been doing is accumulating this very detailed data and working with other vendors, which will happen here too, to get as detailed a representation of you as possible to sell you personalized ads and so forth. We're going to see the same thing here, where these are Trojan horses. And then the other thing that I think makes policy complicated is that the pace of development here is really not predictable. That 2017 paper that you mentioned didn't even win a Best Paper Award at NeurIPS that year. People thought, okay, this is one more paper in this genre, and turned out to have pretty profound implications. I still think we're a long way from artificial general intelligence, but there are a lot of practical things we can do with this technology. We don't really understand the pace. So, we can have a drink and argue about it a little bit, but none of us really know how fast this is moving. It's certainly going to move reasonably fast, and it's certainly this kind of technology is going to be used as a Trojan horse, and we need to think about that.
Great, thank you. I'd like to use this opportunity to also open it up to the audience for questions and comments, and maybe I can also proactively invite Jared Genser for comment. Jared, renowned human rights lawyer, but also a co-founder of the Neuro Rights Foundation. You've had a chance to hear this. You've also been looking at personally. Any observation on what you've heard here, and what question would you put to the audience or to the panel here?
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, it's not very exciting for me to say that I agree substantially with pretty much what everyone is saying. I do fall on the side of this is moving faster rather than slower. I'm working with one of the world's leading experts on neurotech, Rafael Yuste, who says that things that he thought would take 5 years are now taking 1 or 2. So I think we're moving faster, and also because $1 billion a year is being spent just by China alone through its military on researching neurotech. And I'm quite confident that they're working on, even though I have no personal knowledge, decoding human thoughts, potentially using these devices for torture and other kinds of things. I'll just make my brief comment is that our foundation is coming out with a study to try to bring some data to these questions in the next 2 weeks on review of 30 consumer neurotech products that are publicly available for purchase, and reviewing the user agreements, and then benchmarking them against international standards across 15 thematic areas. And it probably is no surprise to hear that across those 30 companies, all of them own your full brain scan, even though they only need a small part of it. And all but one allows that company to sell or otherwise transfer the data. We're not saying it's because these are bad actors, but exactly as Mr. Gill said, we're at very early stages and people don't know what best practice is or how to do it. There's a lot of work to be done. So the question I would have is for the panelists is, I think we're all in agreement this is moving fast. How do we move the international system faster? Our foundation is working at the national level in the US, Chile, Brazil, and Mexico to do national regulation, but would very much be interested to hear any great ideas we have for how to make people understand that this is a today problem, not a tomorrow problem.
Great. Who'd like to take that first? Yeah, Amandeep, can I go to you?
I think that's a great question. How do we, we've made the case that things need to move faster on the governance side, on the awareness side, but how do we make that happen? There's a conference that UNESCO is organizing on this. And in New York, there is the Summit of the Future where a global digital compact is to be adopted. How can we reinforce the principled approach to these technologies? How can we put in place some concrete commitments and actions and some kind of a review and follow-up mechanism, because the tech is moving fast and we need to make sure that, as we update our understanding of how existing obligations apply, we are keeping in step with the technology. So I see those couple of opportunities, but I think we need to work harder on bringing the industry together. The forum's work on this issue could be helpful in that regard. And if there is a safe space, because from my experience of the lethal autonomous weapons discussion, some of the investors, some of the companies were reluctant to join the discussion because they feared being branded as makers of killer robots and so on. So can we work on this problem and create the conditions for those multi-stakeholder conversations to happen?
Can I add to that?
And if there's anyone else with questions in the audience, please raise your hand and we'll come to you after each other.
Just briefly adding to that, so agreed, a principled approach can help us get there more quickly. Part of what the work I've been doing has looked at is, in this bridge that we're talking about with AI, as well as other emerging technologies, there's a consistent theme across all of them. It isn't just neurotechnology that's seeking to decode brain and mental experiences. You mentioned Apple Provision. Their eye tracking capabilities really are meant to make inferences about mental experiences and to try to understand what we're thinking and feeling. A lot of these technologies, if you think about a broader class of cognitive biometrics, are raising the same issue. And so rather than a technology by technology approach, recognizing that, especially with the urgency that everyone feels with respect to AI, it can be governed across a principled approach across all of them. We can recognize that there is this fundamental right to cognitive liberty, and that maps on to existing human rights of self-determination and mental privacy and freedom of thought. And we can recognize that that's true whether it's social media that's seeking to understand our psychological profiles, it's eye tracking, or it's neural data that's being collected, which gives the urgency because those products are already on the market, and it allows us to be able to meet this technology as it arrives more broadly on the market.
I'll just add one thing, which is I was really struck by what you said about terms of service, and shouldn't be surprised by it because people are signing similar terms of service with their cars, and the cars are tracking where they're going and possibly sharing data with Meta and so forth. One thing I think that this does point to is we need firmer consumer advocacy and literacy campaigns around what you are signing and why it actually matters. And somehow we're not getting that message out. And this is, one more place where it's really going to maybe matter even more than it has before.
Okay, thank you. Okay, question there in the front.
Thank you for such an interesting panel so far. It's been really interesting to get your perspectives on this issue, given it's such a prominent topic. I wanted to ask, how do you ensure that you still get the benefits of AI, given that the regulations are so important in this case, but how do you make sure that we still get the best benefits, for example, in maybe a mental health perspective, where it could help things like therapies or people who have issues that need to be addressed, and where AI could help in such a way? How do you make sure that your regulations are kind of allowing for that to happen?
It's a great question. And I'll say most people who are kind of fervently working on these issues recognize the biggest risk comes from the raw data itself, right? So if you have, rather than an inference that has to be drawn, if you want to go left and right, the richness of brain data is such that there are a lot of other inferences that could be made if it was accessible to the individual. Those other inferences include, for example, aggregating large data sets to be able to learn about mental health and well-being. But there's a way to do that, which is if data lives on device, and some people choose to participate in studies that allow the study of very specific issues, depression, ADHD, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, much like the very large Apple Heart Health study that they did, which led in collaboration with a university under an IRB, a consented to process of sharing data that was for a limited purpose. They are able to gain tremendous insights from that. That same thing can happen if suddenly we're tracking our everyday brain health and wellness and our everyday brain activity. There is a wealth of data there. There is a respectful and individual privacy preserving way of studying that data to gain the insights that can benefit humanity.
Great, thank you. And maybe building on that last question, also starting with Gary and then working this way, could you build further on the opportunities you see in the space? A lot of discussions here is focused on the clear need to protect privacy, build consumer understanding. What do you see as the key opportunities emerging in this space that we also want to make sure that we don't miss?
I mean, the short-term ones are certainly like helping people that are paralyzed be able to walk again and so forth, helping people that are blind. Like some of that I think is relatively close and is going to have major impact. I think that helping with depression and other mental disorders is something that is relatively feasible in the relatively near future. I mean, always these things, we try them out and then, it's sort of like phase 3 clinical trials. A lot of them don't work. So, not every shot on goal is going to work, but I think we have more and more shots on goal and we'll really be able to help people with mental health issues. I think if we get the laws right so that we're not having this kind of Trojan horse problem, then I think there's a lot of potential to help with those kinds of things. In the long term, I actually wrote in 2008, I wrote a piece for the New York Times about having systems that automatically help us with our memory and our reasoning and so forth. And that is possible. I wouldn't even want people to play around with them, though, until we get these privacy issues correct first.
Yeah, Amadou?
Yes, I think that leads to the learning and education opportunity. But I think we won't get there if we have reckless use of this technology. In fact, it'll be unhelpful. We are faced with aging populations. Demographics are changing very rapidly. So brain health, the percentage of brain health related problems as a subset of overall health related problems is rising. So there is a tremendous opportunity there, for societal well-being. And that's why I'm very concerned about not getting this right at this stage because of the opportunity that's out there.
I will echo those and add one final thing, which is we know personally virtually nothing about what's happening in our own brains. We're able to track the number of steps we take a day, know our heart rate and other basic metrics, but this part of ourselves that we so closely identify with, we have this just very inaccurate way of accessing. And so the possibility of making transparent to ourselves what's happening in our own brains, whether that's for mindfulness, meditation, stress levels, depression, or just being able to know yourself better, that to me is a really promising forefront beyond the incredible promise that we could have with respect to disease, with respect to neurological disorders and movement disorders that we could really seek to make true inroads on as the technology continues to develop.
Great. Thank you. If I could just briefly summarize, what I've heard here is, we have a rapidly evolving landscape. It's not well understood by the general public, let alone business leaders or policymakers. This is something that we need to work on further and develop consumer literacy and individual literacy so people understand how to protect their own privacy and safety in those dimensions. We have existing laws and frameworks. We need to see how we put those fully to use, and then building on that, see whether further work is needed, and also being able to differentiate between what's taking place in the medical technology, where we see amazing benefits and potential, especially for traditionally disadvantaged people that didn't have access to society and to interaction, while managing also for the consumer tech, where the standards are not always up to what they need to be to protect citizens in this environment. And I think also from Amandeep, the need to make sure that we have an inclusive participation there of the private sector and industry, but I would also include here civil society into that group so that we can navigate this future space. So thank you for joining us on today's session on neurotechnology, and thank you as well to the panelists.
Thank you.